morning to all of you, and thank you for choosing to spend your Sunday talking about these fascinating topics in this wonderful venue. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel on dramaturgy and technology. And we've got a reasonable amount of time, so we've got about 2 hours or so, I think, so we can take it at a leisurely pace with about 25 minutes for each of the presenters. And I was also told that I could also introduce them in a bit more detail than is sometimes done. So I'll speak for a short while and say something also about this panel, about how this fits within this conference, and about the people who you'll hear more about later on. So, unlike the people sitting at the table here, I'm not really an artist. I'm more of a researcher. And one of the things that really fascinates me is technology. I'm somebody who's interested in doing ethnographies of practice, in doing histories of theater practice. And technology is one of the things that really fascinates me, but it also puzzles me sometimes. So I want to share an experience as a spectator that I often have, and that might be shared by other people in the room. I know that some of the organizers have also talked about this before, how sometimes technology is one of these things that is really hard to do well in a performance. I often get the feeling when I see technology that it's not precisely done in the perfect way, that there's something missing. It's not necessarily a case of the amount of technology being used. Sometimes less would be more, but sometimes actually it's not a matter of the amount, but of the modes in which it's being used. And I'm often drawn to see things because they use technology, but once I'm at the stage, I'm disappointed by what happens. I know this is a common thing. There's also a common trend to use technology in ways that are perhaps not optimal. One of the ideas I also remember from the previous conference, one idea that was thrown around often here is how the art of the dramaturg is something, it's in a way also a thankless job. In the sense that if the dramaturg did their job correctly, sometimes you don't notice it. But when you see a show that fails, there's often a feeling that a dramaturg was missing. You know, that, oh, this thing was interesting, but it kind of, you know, it misses a dramaturg. There should have been a dramaturg here. And I would like to propose that perhaps one of the areas where dramaturgy is the most needed today is technology. So that's one of a slight provocation where I'd like this to begin. And this is one thing that I've been discussing also with the panelists today. And I'd like to ask them for their perspectives on, you know, what does it mean to use technology too much? What does it mean to use it well? And what does it mean to be a dramaturg? You know, what does it mean to correctly or usefully integrate technology? What are the dramaturgical principles where technology works well? So by way of introduction, I'll say some things about the artists here and about the things that they share in common. So we have 3 globe-trotting artists. You look at the amount of countries that they've been to. That's interesting, of course, in its own right. They seem to all have converged in Taiwan at some point. So I think that's the one place where all of you have been presenting your work. Another thing that really struck my eye when I was going through their biographies is that they have all been part of collectives. So they all work and in many cases set up these collectives of people from different disciplines. So WENCHI, who's going to be the first presenter, she set up this e-lab in Taiwan. And she's both a media artist and a dancer and works with a variety of like-minded people in Taiwan and overseas. We've also got MARTYN COUTTS, who's originally from Australia, but also has traveled extensively worked in different kinds of media. He also co-founded the Field Theory, which is an artist collective, working out of Australia primarily. And finally, JOMPET KUSWIDANATO has been heavily involved with Teater Garasi, who, even though it has the name Teater, there is like this artist collective from Indonesia, where people that are musicians that were, I think Mas JOMPET himself was originally a musician first before transiting over to the visual arts and to theater. So that's one of the things that is interesting that they all share in common. And I just want to highlight some very brief things of conversations we've had in the past few days. there were two workshops on Friday. Many of you here were part of those workshops that were on the topic of technology and theater. So I would also encourage you later on to bring in your own experiences and questions about those events. And just to finish this brief introduction, I want to say something about each of the people here that I found worth sharing. So in the first workshop with Martin, he said that he often talks himself out of a job. That when people invite him to be a media artist, he often tells people, well, do you actually need media? And I often think, no. You know, I'm quoting him, perhaps misquoting him, and he'll address this later on. But I think that's a really interesting thing, and perhaps we should do this more often. Perhaps media artists should talk themselves out of a job more often, or we should talk technology out of its job more often. That's one question that I'd like to leave here lingering for the rest of this session. Then in the workshop by WENCHI later that evening, she talked about her experience working at CERN, and I won't say too much because she'll mention that later today as well. But she is a fascinating storyteller, as you'll see soon, and she talked us to this ethnography of artists at this massive collaborative institution in Switzerland. And one of the things that was so surprising for me about that is how different, in many ways, it is the way that artists and scientists work. So just one quick thing that she mentioned was that to come up with an answer to a particular problem, they would divide people into two teams, and then each team would have to work through their answer, and then if both answers were correct at the end of a long time, that meant that the question was correct, which strikes me as exactly the opposite of what we would do in a theater situation. That, if you would set up an assignment, with people and they all came up with the same answer, that doesn't mean the answer was correct. That probably means that the question was wrong. So as a very different kind of way to think about it. And then, finally, like the person that I've known for the longest time in this table is JOMPET, because I was based in Indonesia for several years before, and I'm very interested in the work that Teater Garasi has done. And I have this very specific memory of an event to commemorate the anniversary of Teater Garasi, where people were doing all sorts of things in this house that was turned into a performance space. And for his own project, he did an installation that he'll talk a bit more about later on called Noda, or Stain. And it was, as you'll see later on, a simple machine, but incredibly effective, where paint was progressively spread through a room throughout a very long amount of time. So one of the things that I also take from this is that how technology sometimes it's not necessarily these, big machines, but small contraptions that change how we think about space and other people. So I've spoken way too long, but as you can see, this is just an indication that I'm really excited to be in the presence of the people here and looking forward to the conversations that will follow. So the first presenter will be WENCHI, so please.
Thank you, Miguel. Feel very excited too. All right, so I start with the term that Hao Nian started. So thank you for Hao Nian to invite me here. It was such a pleasure and honor. And so I'm very happy to have this chance to share with you of my idea on technology, although these two terms that Hao Nian gave me are not the two terms that I start with. So instead of talk dramaturgy for me is somehow still very abstract. So I'm still discovering from yesterday's panel, and also I attend the first ADN here years ago, and then I try to understand how people now try to define this in Asia. So I worked many years in Europe, so I have a very vague idea of what dramaturg is. And for me, it was like a person during the process who is more for me, library or storyteller. So there's always this person there. And as a dancer, I think my job is just, dance and and work with a choreographer. So while there's a lot of, it's very physical demanding, I'm not going to open the book during the night. So I would rather go home and watch a film and eat well and sleep. So the next day I can work, you know, like I can have a good physical condition. So during the process, I won't have a time to read, let's say, or I don't have this physical or mental space to read. And so there's always this person I can turn to when I have a problem with choreographer, that there's some idea I don't understand, or there's some contest that I didn't really get into, or I don't know who I am in the piece or during the process. So this person is responsible to guide me in a way when choreographer has no time. And then also to tell the story. For example, there's time when I work in Indonesia and culturally I really don't understand. So I try to understand the context. So the dramaturg will tell me a lot of stories like myth stories on how people look at the ritual and symbols and characters. And so somehow I learn a lot from there. And technology is something that I put the two alternative subject under there, which is rather the two terms I start with, is the body and movement. So as a dancer and choreographer, as a dancer trained, and I look at the world in motion, like, so I didn't think of like dance so much, but I think of how much people are curious to see the moving thing or moving object. So the starting point is actually from early photography and film. And the reason why I changed, not the change, but to make a shift to the new media arts is that after many years of being a dancer, I started to have a desire to create something. But I don't have a very clear question what I want to do. So I make a stop and make a graduate study. And at that time I choose, at that time called new media arts. And the reason why I call that is because I choose that is because during that time in Taiwan, I found out there's a group of professors or students or artists trying to figure out what this new media art is. So it's a kind of like genre. Nobody knows how to define it yet. And then so I found, okay, great. I think that is what I'm trying to look for, because I don't want to jump back to the dance training or choreography training, and because there's a reason why I went to Europe to work is because in Taiwan there's, I think, okay, I only saying in my personal point of view, is like in the education system it's encouraged to think only in dance. So to think only what the dance is and what's the dance movement is. So you spend a lot of time in dance, and I feel very, let's say, I feel very trapped as a non live in the temple and trying to practice every day of what dance is. So the reason why I choose to work in Belgium for years is because I figure out that I observe the choreographer and dancer there. They are not just thinking about dance, but also think about what dance can do for the society. So there's a very strong relation between dance and what happened now in the society. In any case, then I jump into this new media arts. In the beginning, they try to say it's a technology, but then they feel technology is too much tech-orientated. So it's more than the technique itself. So new media art means there's a new way of communication that we still don't know what it is, but it enhanced by the technology. So I start with, wow, 20 minutes actually is very short. Already, introduction takes me like 7 minutes. Okay, and it's just first slide. Okay, so when I'm in the new media art study, it turns out I have to sit down a lot. So there's not dance video, there's only classroom. So we sit down and talks a lot, like talks every day and hours a day, and we try to talk what's the, in many genres, like video art, computer art, kinetic art, and sound art, interactive art, and also a lot of software, and to see what's the aesthetic in this, trying to define a certain aesthetic together, or how we are going to do with it. And so in the beginning, of course, I'm fascinated by the movement. And then when it come out, I studied this beginning of how photography starts. And as you might know of Muybridge photography and early film from the Brother Lumière, and this on the right side is the camera obscura. So it's the beginning of, it's kind of the technical device that helped the painter to draw the nature on the paper. And there's a lot of story from the Brother Lumière when I study it, and it talks about when the first time Brother Lumière put the film in Paris, and this is the film he played. It's just simply a train arrived in the train station. And then the reaction of the audience is that because they never see the moving images, so when they see this, the audience all get panic because they think it's a train coming towards them. So they all get up and run out. And so for me was like, wow. So that perception of reality from the video, and comparing to, I don't know if you still remember the 9/11 event in 2001. And then I remember at the time I was like coming back from the dinner and go back to the dance company, and I passed by the guard, and then I saw that he's watching the news of Twin Tower collapsed. And then at the time I didn't realize it's something really happened. So we both are watching the news and repeating and all the time, and then we say, Hollywood make a new film, and then they start to attack the Twin Tower. And then it looked really visually like striking. And then, of course, afterward I realized it's a real thing, it's a real attack. So I start to think about, from the Brother Lumière, how people react till 2001, how we see it as repeating images, and then we didn't really doubt about its truth, or if it is really happened. So we think of it's kind of like drama, or it's a film, which is not real. So this start to get into my mind, and what is the reality and what is the virtuality. So there's a lot of reading or a reference. I'm not going to avoiding talking about that, because I discussed a bit with Haoni, and I wonder if I should cut into more practice part or also some theory together. But then, to be honest, to study new media art or theory actually give me a lot of inspirations, and where let's say the question starts. So I find myself, I try to observe doing all this talk and reading, which triggers me to say like, well, after reading a phrase, I would tell myself, well, I'm not sure about it. And when I'm not sure about it, my question starts. So it breaks into the four things I think I still try to even study new media art, but I try to understand what its connection to my body. So I figure out, well, I'm talking with a lot of different artists who is in a different medium. We all have a common term called body. So it's the body of the sound, the body of the installation, the body of technology, or the body of the computer. So this is always shared. This term is always shared, and aura. So Walter Benjamin talks about in the beginning, he's worried about this in the beginning of mechanical age, that art can be reproduced. And when it's the reproduction of the artwork, does this still call art? So where's this aura, or I would say, where is the spirit? Or in my physical experience, I would say, where is my presence is. So to turn into this aura to presence in the theater helps me a lot to think what actually disappear while I work with technology. So will be the third point. And the fourth point will be from the Marshall Luke McLuhan. So he has this book called Extensions of Man. And at the time I tried to find out what's the connection to, for example, my laptop and me, or this virtuality and me. And then this book helped me to think the technology is actually the extension of the human being. So while you are projecting your desire or what you want or how you create your another identity in the virtual space, actually you try to extend your senses into this space. And while this part is extended, somehow you become one body. So this helped me to visualize what technology can refers to. And then for me, of course, the strongest reference will be the physical body itself. Then I start to work on, like, first thing I'm questioning is in how machine loop. So for example, when I look at the 911 image in many times, and I try to record from each time I look at this image, and each time I have a different understanding of it. Either it's something add on top, or I try to create another story or I try to change the reality which it is. And so I was questioned on what if my body can be reproduced and then can be looped in the system, and then does this looping system perfect? Because I think in the propaganda of new media or propaganda of technology, it always encourages us to think about the better future and then to think about the better communication. But at that time I was very critical about how it can help us to communicate better, because somehow I feel myself can communicate better through dance itself. So this is kind of, I try to discover in this looping mechanism what is still there and what is missing. And second work is the wave. So it's I think Martin, we just talked about this piece because it's very heavy hardware that you see. As you might like imagine these high-tech things is to construct something. I have that idea also in that year 2011 and 2014. I want to create a perfect machine that can be like a human being. So I set up this goal. I want this machine can move like my body, like as organic as it can be. So I pay a lot, like I learned a lot in 2011 and also pay a lot also. So it's really but there's it's a very critical point that Michael also tried to give me a question, like how much, because it linked to the budget, to the money that we invest in the technology. So how much we can go and in order not to lose ourselves. And then so this piece, 2011, I don't have much budget, but I create in a way it functions, but not really. It's kind of halfway. So my ambition was cut halfway, and I also feel like, well, creating this mass machine, I wait a lot, so my body feels most of the time waiting, and then waiting for that money to be burned out, waiting for my bank account to be empty, and waiting for, you know, all my team somehow all exhausted and collapse somehow. So after this piece, but then it was important I do this because I didn't realize how much this machine can take. And then, of course, in 2014, we have another budget to do the upgrade. So at the time, I was thinking of all these I call it wave because in technology, it's talking about this energy as a waveform. Either it's electricity, either it's a Wi-Fi signal. So there's a lot of signal in this invisible space which you don't visualize it. So I try to visualize it, and together with trying to see the city as an artificial nature. And then of course after that my bank account empty and my team collapsed. And then I was thinking back, okay, I want to drop that high-tech ideology. And so thinking back, how can I work without tech? So I went back to the environment of the theater and then thinking what I have there. So theater lights, and so I choose another team, and then the team was more orientative to, actually is to create the illusion of technology, because it's all about behind the machine, what is the mechanism is working behind the machine or behind the system. So rather to put up the real projection, we work more on to finding the material that reflects in the pattern. You will believe it's from the really high-tech graphic software design or with a really high definition projector from the back. And this is the question I try to give at that time. And then after this piece, I feel a bit lost, because then what the technology can still mean and what it can still go for. And so jump to the second section, big turning page, because I only have 7 minutes left. So the next stop, I think between this question and to the next things I jump into the residency in CERN is in 2016. And at that time, honestly, I had no idea about quantum physics. It's mathematics, biology, physics is my very weak subjects in school. And because dancers are somehow all trained in literature part or sociology part, we are not trained in this part. So from the high school, I was divided immediately into this part of the subject. And then until the point, because I'm still trying to find what the technology mean, and then why, where it can still helpful for my practice. And then this arson comes up, and because at that time I didn't know about quantum physics. Actually, I asked a lot of friends and who can come up together, because it needs to find a partner to go to the residence together. And it turns out not so many, a lot of colleagues I work with, a lot of artists I work with, they didn't find any connections after studying the website of CERN. And then but I want to go there because there's one thing I want to see, which is the World Wide Web server. So this is the place, the birthplace of World Wide Web. And then there's the first server is here. So I want to see that. So I say, I have to go there, and without knowing what the quantum physics is. So I try to study again my high school physics book, and then try to find a connection there, what's the dance, and then there's still some structure I can find out, which is I think in the performance making, we are so familiar with it, but we didn't realize it's physics too, because physics actually study the matters. So it's how matter work, how the energy, how the space, how you define time and space. So I've tried to, put my theater practice breakdown into few principles, which I think is what I believe and what I can, is how I do, how I see space and time. And so the scientists in CERN feel very happy, because I kind of relate to the time space they try to study. And so just give you some basic information of CERN. So CERN is the world, the largest quantum physics laboratory in the world, and it's in Geneva. And so it's famous by, it's this LHC, the Large Hadron Colliders, and it's 27 kilometers between France and Switzerland and under Earth. So the working of the quantum physics is to collide the particles and see what's the components inside. So this is some landscape. It's like, I was expecting a very sci-fi place, you know, like when I imagined the very high-tech laboratory, and then it turns out very factory-like. And then scientists say, you know, WENCHI is not about visually, it's beautiful. It's about, it's practical. And so I was like, okay, different aesthetic, you know. So the street was a huge compound, and the street was named by the deceased scientist. So this is the biggest boulevard named by Einstein. And the scientists, more than 3,000 scientists, work in this big compound and divide into two groups, experimental physicists and theoretical physicists. And this is something I really want to see. It's the first World Wide Web server. And it's interesting, the beginning of how, because now we are so familiar with, and we see it as a tool of communication. And then, but actually the beginning purpose is actually just to exchange the data between the scientists. So there's not such a big concern about the communication for the people around the world. Cloud chamber, and strange little things. I study some, also try to observe how scientists' behavior. They drink a lot of cappuccino, espresso, strong coffee all the time, and coffee machine everywhere for free. And they hate, and because they say, well, your brain starts to solve a problem, you cannot let it stop. You just have to keep it running. And then they don't like people to clean their research room. And then this is the very tiny, their office and corridor. And this is, it's not sci-fi. So what I think is cloud, you know, while we talk about cloud, it's very realistically look like that. It's really a lot of, let's say, hard disk, big hard disk. And there's the whole basement of hard disk. And okay, what I learned from this residency, it's a fundamental research on matter, thinking in scales. So imagine the particle as the smallest scale on this side, and the universe is the largest scale on this side, and human being in between. So thinking in scales and big questions. So they don't talk about technology so much because they say you need to start with the question. What is our question? So our question is how our universe starts, and then also. Fact is what it is, it's beyond intuition. So they don't talk about truth, they don't talk about belief. They say it doesn't matter if you believe or not, it's about fact. So fact is what is, and science is most of the time beyond intuition and beauty in equation, because there's this moment I sit in the restaurant and there's mathematician on my side, and then he suddenly say, "WENCHI, did you realize the equation of general relativity is so beautiful?" And I was like, yes. But, you know, so another aesthetic. Okay, then I start to create some workshop and to try to see how I apply this experience in dance. So Dance Doesn't Matter used the self-made camera obscura. I think the people who do the workshop will know this. Also, working in the principle of quantum physics, because it's about cutting the space and time half and half until it's turned into the smallest scale of particle. So I try to rework in the theater space or in the studio how I divide the actual space into half-half and to see how the participant react to that. Also cut into the mental space half and half, where we did a practice the other day with the mobile phone, because while people on the phone, they are half awareness shared with another space and time. So I try to create those that link exercise, let's say, a prototype together. And so for me, working with technology is never, it's never about technology. It's about which question you want to address and what kind of tool you can use. So I never define, because Hao Nian asked me, do you define what kind of technology in the beginning you want to do? Then I say, no, actually I try to define my question first and then to see what kind of tool that I can take from. So yeah, I think it's time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. So now we move on to our second presenter of this panel, so to Mas Jompet. Mongo.
I'm going to present a lot of images in the projector. So if yeah, I think you guys, if you want to have a better perspective, I think it's up to you.
Yeah, can we dim the lights? Is that possible?
And also the speakers. Yeah. Okay, I have some images to present for you. This is the first picture I want to show. I was about 5 years old in this picture. You see, I'm in my kindergarten uniform with my father in a police station. I remember we took this picture after my father signed a letter. Later I know that it was a statement letter to stop selling liquor. In the 80s, our house was a countrified bar for local youth. When it turned to be lively, the neighbors were objected and made report to the police. This image, I took it from a newspaper. I keep it because I'm very sure that I'm in this picture, among this crowd that spill over the street. The picture was possibly taken from an upper level of a building or mosque minaret, or maybe a treetop, I don't really remember. This is the funeral procession of the Sultan in 1988. I supposed to be in the front row sitting on the asphalt, but I still didn't find it. From my place I can see clearly the Sultan's coffin passing through slowly in a cart that was pulled by maybe like 6 horses. I remember the smell of the flower fragrance. I remember the silence. Fogly, you can see a BMX bike laid down under the tree behind the crowd. This one. Yeah, that's mine. The next image is me with my Catholic friends waving 2 small flags of Indonesia and Vatican. In 1989, Pope John Paul II visited our city. I and Catholic families in the village walked more than an hour to the army base where the Pope gave Mass. I was happy to enter the army base. I was fascinated to see the heavily armed soldiers. I was able to see an M16 from 1 meter away. We took this picture actually because we want to be in a picture with a row of F-16 behind us, but they are too small in the picture. In the next image, the date is imprinted in the photograph, 30th of September 1987. I was with my elementary school mates. I'm the one in the right end. My face was blocked by my friend's three-finger signs. The picture was taken by my teacher when we stood in a row in front of our school gate. We were ready to walk about 30 minutes to the nearest cinema to see the anti-communist operation movie. And it was not the first time.
In a rubber garden, I ran into Captain in a green beret, two platoon commanders, two revolutionary council, midnight briefing to foil.
Next image. The image is not clear anymore. It is me with a girl whose name I don't remember, and a person whose head was cut off from the picture. The girl was the daughter of a grocery shop owner who was a good friend of my parents. This was taken in a storeroom of the shop. You see the cardboard boxes behind us? They were full of pirated Western music cassettes. They were just taken down from display because the government suddenly banned pirated Western music records. I think before 86 or 87, all Western music records in the shops were pirated one. Not long before that, the government also banned sad songs. I went to this shop to buy my first music album, Van Halen. The next image, these are serial images of tattoos, erased tattoos actually. This belongs to my neighbor's body. In the 80s, they decided to erase their tattoo because there was a big military operations to eradicate gangster. And having tattoos or having long hair was risky at the time, since the military used this mark to specify their target. And these guys were actually loyal customers of my father's bar.
Keadilan dan dari tindakan kekerasan yang dilakukan oleh oknum.
Tetapi jika kami tidak diperhatikan,
yang ada di dalamnya, saya memutuskan untuk menyatakan berhenti dari jabatan saya sebagai Presiden Republik Indonesia. Terhitung sejak saya bacakan pernyataan ini pada hari ini, Kamis 21 Mei 1998.
The next image is, this is not the picture I want to show. Anyway, this is the picture of my hand-built radio transmitter. I made this when I was in the secondary school. I did a lot of illegal broadcasts. I named this radio station as Radio Aika Aibon. The next image is me with my first band in a rental music studio named Vivace, owned by a policeman who is also my guitar teacher. The studio was located in a low-rank police housing. There were no aircon in the studio, so that's why we were all shirtless. There was only one big window facing an open-air volleyball court where the police usually hang out. This picture was taken by another policeman who tested his new pocket camera. He took a picture of us from that window, laughing and saying, "You're going to be famous." Our eyes were red by the flash. The next image, I was possibly about 5 years old. I was carried in the back of my father for being too tired hiking up the Sandang Sono hill. On top of the hill is the Portuguese-made statue of Mother Mary and a spring. We were here for annual pilgrimage. In this picture, our group was praying in front of Jesus bearing the cross diorama.
The next image is me receiving a trophy from the head of my village for winning the badminton competition during the Independence Day commemoration in 1986. I was still in my army costume with wooden rifle and fake mustache because we did a street parade previously. The head of the village was also in his army costume with pistol in his hip. He played the role of young Suharto in the parade.
Tanah tumpah darahku yang mulia, yang ku puja sepanjang masa. Tanah airku aman dan makmur, Pulau Kelapa nan amat subur, Pulau Melati pujaan bangsa sejak dulu kala.
Engkau gadis muda remaja, pakai sekuntum melati. Engkau serahkan jiwa raga di tapal batas Bekasi. Engkau dinamakan Sri Kandi, pendekar putri sejati. Engkau turut jejak pemuda, turut mengawal dari. Oh, pendekar putri nan cantik, dengarkan
bersumpah janji di depan saksi. Namun semua hilanglah sudah ditelan dusta.
Thank you very much for that. And now we'll move on to the last presentation of this panel with Martin.
Okay, hi, I'm Martin, and I'm from Melbourne, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I work as a performance maker and a dramaturg and a video artist as well. So I make work that's usually non-text based. It's usually technology driven, and it uses non-traditional spaces like the public or online. So through the presentation, I'm going to present some provocations. Some of those provocations I agree with, and some of them I don't agree with, but I'm just going to throw them up as a conversation starter. But before I do, it's funny coming to a dramaturgy conference because, of course, everyone, as everyone knows, just goes, what is dramaturgy? What does a dramaturg do? Those questions just come all the time. And when I was at VCA, my lecturer, Richard Murfitt, said to me that the dramaturg is the midwife to the process. And I thought that was a really great thing. It kind of makes me think, who is the mother and what is the baby? Is the mother the creative team, or is the mother the director or the playwright, and is the baby the work? I don't know. Anyway, I always kind of abide by that because I think midwife is a really great kind of term for a dramaturg. So, to start with, it's been my experience as a maker, and Miguel kind of alluded to this before, and as a dramaturg and also as a video artist, that we very rarely cut technology from the show. It looks great, it's shiny, our attention is directed to it, and why would we let it go? So when I work as a video artist, I'm quite often arguing myself out of a job, saying things like, why is that video there? What is the point of it? And I guess you can never really let go of being a dramaturg, even when you are actually the video artist. So often media comes in late in a production, and if it hasn't truly integrated into the work, it feels like a late addition. It feels like it's been tacked on. And I would argue that technology needs to be rehearsed as much as should be rehearsed with the actors, as much as, say, a prop is, or the set piece is, or the costume. So you should be working with the technology as early as possible, hopefully before the actors even get into the room, if you're working in the theatre. So I made a work in 2007 called Wayfarer, which was a live game work where audience members got to play performers as if they were avatars in a game. So they would look into a screen and they would talk to them live, and then they would direct them through a space that they couldn't see. And we worked for 2 years to perfect the software and the hardware for this project. And the performers came in with 3 days before the show went up. And I argued at the time that that performers are the most reliable pieces of technology that we had on that show. They're certainly the most flexible, they're the most adaptable, and they didn't break as much. So as soon as media content enters the stage space, it's already creating a series of complicated relationships. We're incredibly visually literate as humans. We're able to pass a lot of visual information in an adept manner. But I think we're only just beginning to be able to understand how technology works along the older media on stage. A friend of mine who's also a very talented sound artist and technologist once said to me, why are we still calling it new media? It's not new. And I guess it's true for those of you that are dubbed millennials, or even the generation after that. It may feel like this stuff's been around forever, but it's worth keeping in mind that the internet is only 30 years old, and YouTube started in 2005, and Instagram started in 2010. So these things are new. And my answer to him to that question, is new media still new, is, well, it depends on your overall view of time. My response to my friend was, in relation to a piece of charcoal or a paintbrush, yes, new media is new. So we still have a long way to go. I think we're able to process language, we're able to process how the body moves in a choreography. We're even able to understand mise-en-scène on stage because we've been doing it for hundreds of years. And in terms of like reading bodies, we've been doing it for millennia. So our ability to read surround sound, our ability to read projection or interactive devices is not at the same level yet. It's just not there. So what does a projection mean in a space? What does a big rectangle of light mean? If someone's making a headphone work, why are we being asked to use those devices? What connotations does a TV have in the space? And that's the job of the dramaturg. And I feel like as I said, we've got a long way to go. So I'm staying in a hotel Thanks very much to ADN for that. During this week, I was in the gym in the morning, and I met a guy who told me, after being on the treadmill for about 20 minutes, that he had a heart attack in January, and it was in Shanghai, and he was as he was being wheeled into the theatre, he said to the doctor, "What are my chances? Am I going to die?" And the doctor said, "You have 10% chance of living." And he said, "I need my phone. I need to call my son in England and tell him goodbye." And so, luckily, he survived, but I just started to wonder, like, what is his relationship now to this? Like, what does it mean for him? What does the phone mean to him? Is it just a device, or is it something more? And in 9/11, which was referenced by WENCHI, like, there are stories of people that were in the Twin Towers, but they were above where the planes hit, and they were phoning their loved ones, and some of them got hold of their loved ones, but some of them didn't, and some of those messages went to message bank, and then those loved ones of those families were trying to contact the telco companies to retain those last messages, but it was super hard to do that. So, what does a phone mean? What is the semiotics of the digital devices that we have? It's not just a functional thing. We talk to our loved ones on them. We watch our favourite shows. We find our way through the world using maps. We soundtrack our world through streaming music. It's loaded full of meanings. And, in the theatre, we really hone in and we go, what does that chair mean? What does that piece of set mean? What does that costume mean? And we need to be doing that for technology as well. Why is there a projector in the ceiling? Why is it hidden? Why is it not in the space? These are questions that need to be asked. So I want to look at a project first where I actually asked the question, do I need technology in this show? And the answer was no. So I became really fascinated with the Spratly Island chain in the South China Sea, which, as a lot of you would know, there's a lot of build-up of tension there. 6 or 7 different countries claim islands in that island chain. It's highly contested, and these islands are completely uninhabitable. And they were being occupied primarily for strategic gain. And in terms of Australia's relationship to the region, we have a lot of trade flowing through there, into China, into Japan. We also have a lot of our coal goes out, and our coal going into China props up our economy. Like, it's the reason that we've managed to weather the storm as such. So it has impact on us, but I think I was interested in the idea that no one was really talking about this in Australia, and it was a really big thing, and it continues to be so. So I thought about how to stage this work. I thought about how to do it with technology. But in the end, I went with a game structure that actually used tarot cards as the way to deliver the work. So I made a set of tarot cards, 22 of them, and each card is an island in that island chain. Sorry, I just lost my place. So I offered one participant, so it was for one person at a time, this show, and I offered the participant 5 cards, and they chose islands at random. So the stories they got were random, and the narrative that was generated was random as well. So someone might get 5 Chinese cards, someone might get 2 Taiwanese cards and 3 Filipino cards. So the way that the story played out was always going to be different. And because it was such a large, sprawling geopolitical work, I wanted the opportunity to bring it back to a one-on-one conversation. I wanted to distill this huge thing that was going on and just actually have a discursive conversation with someone about these issues. And when I thought about how technology could be involved in this, I actually felt like it would just get in the way. So the technology I used in the show was literally just these cards. So myself and the participant would walk through the city, and we would enter corporate foyers. And I don't know if you have corporate foyers in Singapore, but in Melbourne, these are places at the bottom of corporate buildings. They have lounge chairs in them, and if you're a business person, then you can go and have a sit, and you can read your paper, or you can wait for someone, or you can have a coffee, and they're free. They're free. And if you're wearing what I'm wearing in there, then I could sit there all day. But if you're wearing what Jason was wearing, then you get moved on. So that space is a contested space. So these spaces became the islands for me. They became a contested space, which is also kind of mirroring what was happening in the actual content of the work. So here's me and some foyers. So these are the cards, and so each of the islands actually had a story to tell as well. So I gave each of them a kind of symbology as well. So this one on the right, this island used to belong to one nation, but then another nation managed to steal it one day when a whole garrison from that island went off to another island for a general's birthday party. And the other country just swept in, took the island, and the soldiers were too hungover to come back and take it over again. And so it still is occupied by that other country. The one in the centre was the capital of a micronation. So it's called Flat Island or Patag. And the micronation was called the Free Territory of Freedom Land. And it lasted for a little while, but then the Filipino government cracked down on it, and yeah, that went away. And the last one is the Salami. So the Chinese government has been sort of slowly just picking off islands one by one, and then also just building their own islands by dragging kind of sand from nearby reefs and dumping it down. And the salami kind of references a legal term which is called salami slicing, which means that you just cut very, very thin slices, which basically means they just take a little bit at a time, and then no one can kind of pin anything on them because they're just taking bits. So I just found that quite amusing. So in Shell Game, you already have a lot of dramaturgical complexity. The work is mobile, the conversation is open, the order of the content is random, and the relationship is intimate. So why would I introduce technology into that? And it's really interesting, Professor Tadashi was talking about a small gesture and about expressing ourselves subtly, but also this idea that the participation is a placebo pill. So I'm sitting within a context in Australia about participation where there is a lot of participatory work at the moment. And so the challenge is to really try and, make it mean something. And I guess as a participant, you don't want to go along and feel like you're making all of the work. Like, that's the artist's job. Like, why are you making all the work? Anyway. So moving on. So a lot of my work plays out in public space. For me, I want to awaken the audience by placing them in a new site and generate a new relationship. So I'm interested in this quote. The core of it is, venues are designed to ossify the relationship between artist and audience, most appropriate to the 19th century. I just love that so much. Like that the relationship in the theatre is being ossified. I really, really love that. So I'm always outside of the theatre. I don't want that ossification to happen to me. And I think that sometimes technology can reset that relationship when you've got an interactive work. So sometimes when you move people into a new setting, you recontextualise their behaviour. And so you remove the barrier that people might have to go to the theatre. And I think it was talked about yesterday a little bit, that there are barriers to going to the theatre. It tends to be a particular demographic of people that go to the theatre, and especially in Australia as well. So I think technology has the capacity to reset this relationship. It doesn't always work. But, like, for example, there are a lot of headphone works in Australia. And a headphone work enables you to be mobile. It enables you to, transmit sound over long distances. A very intimate quality of sound as well. So there are technologies that can kind of shift the way that you view theatre and performance. So I'll talk about a work called Alter. I'm just going to check the time. What's the time, Yunling? 10 minutes, awesome. Okay, so I talk about a work called Alter, where I was actually the dramaturg. So I'm part of the core team of 4, but I was actually the dramaturg for this work. And Alter is a work for 16 iPads and 16 people. So in Alta, we worked against the way that we regularly interact with a portable device. So we're trying to break the known way in which we hold them. So as we're using handheld devices, there are already relationships in play, as I kind of described before. The digital device is ubiquitous in our world. How do we move beyond these associations? How do we get around the associations and the tactility we already associate with a digital device? So in this case, an iPad or a phone. When she referenced before, Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message in 1964. So how and why we use technology needs to be constantly questioned because it's very loaded. So in Alta, all 16 audience members, every member of the audience is responsible for one iPad, for moving it from one configuration to the next. And the experience has some of the hallmarks of a theatre experience. It's in the dark, it's temporal, it's intimate, but we primarily used the objects as sound and light devices. So we discovered through testing that any content that had face on it, or human body on it, or anything that oriented it in a particular way, just changed the way that we viewed the device. Whereas if it was in a big field, so like a field like this, and we had an abstract piece of imagery, or it was one piece of imagery that was spread across 16. So this is like some imagery of a tree moving, but it's kind of cut up into 16 constituent parts. This is actually when it really started to work, because people forgot that they were iPads, and that they started to go, oh, here is a composite image that's happening here. And so their relationship with the device shifted. And so the other thing that we tried to do as well is, as you can see from the invigilator here, she is handing over the iPad in a way that's different. So we didn't just go like that, because immediately someone would pick it up like that. We tried to give it to them kind of like that. So it becomes a tablet, but it becomes something different. It becomes a more reverent object, I would say. So the work became a meditation on our connection to nature, our ability to slow down and to listen, and our collective nature as a species. So this is people lying down, kind of listening. And the spatialized sound that happened with 16 iPads is just incredible. Like, they're very, very good sound devices, and our ability to hear things spatially is amazing. So the real dramaturgical question in this work was how to move people through the configurations we'd set up. And although the interaction was very minimal, there is a sense that they are responsible for moving the show forward. And I think that in some way means that the audience feels like they're co-authoring the work with us. So again, Professor Tadashi, I mean, it's amazing he was talking about this, but he talked about delegating responsibility as well. So it's just like, it's a very interesting thing, and in a way, the dramaturgy of participation. There's a new panel for you, dramaturgy of participation, unless you've done it before. Like that is a really interesting area right now. Like how do you build dramaturgy for participation when you don't know what the outcome is going to be at all? You have no concept at all. So, we were very simple with that interaction, but it did work. So this again kind of goes to the capitalist engagement that Professor Tadashi was talking about earlier, and I'm not entirely on board with this kind of utopia of co-authorship with an audience member. Even though participation, I do participation in my work because I do want to shift perspective, but it's still up in the air for me, and I work quite hard to make sure that participation also has meaning. It's not just tacked on because it's a trend. But it would, if we are going to shift people out of the theatre, if we are going to change their perspective, then we need to be thinking about how co-authorship can happen in an interesting way. So The final work I want to talk about is body politics. So I showed a tiny little excerpt of this in the workshop on Friday. And this is actually a work that's for the theatre, and it's the first work I've made for the theatre in, I don't know how long, a really long time. And I developed the work in a studio at Taipei Artist Village, and I wanted to keep the elements really basic and really intimate. The work uses a projector, a camera, projection, and a body. Like, that's it, just kind of 3 elements. And at its heart, it's an investigation of the body and technology that feeds back on itself. And it also subtly kind of looks at media culture and our relationship with the camera, which has changed a lot in the past sort of 10 years. Like, how we relate to this camera now is very, very different to how we did 10 years ago. So, yeah, it's interesting. We have some similarities in the work. So, you know, like, I think that it's interesting because, you know, like, you look at that and you go, oh, there's lots of technology in that show, but actually there's not. There's that camera that I'm looking at, and then there's a projector, and that's it. That's the show. Like, it's not like your work where there's a lot of things going on. It's very complicated. I tried to, also because I wanted to make the work just by myself, so I wanted to keep it super, super simple, and so that's kind of how it happened. And the sort of integration of those two things has been very, very married from the very start. It's embedded in the content, it's embedded in the practice. Yeah, theatre should be poor and dumb. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, this is a great quote that I kind of sometimes give to some students that I teach at VCA. It seems odd that theatre is seeking to emulate cinema. Let celluloid do what it does best. So, film is best as film, and I would also say that some theatre, some main stage theatre, could be TV as well. So, do you know what I mean? Like, if it's just some people talking on stage, where's the transformation? Where's the thing that you can only do in the theatre? Where is that? And that's why I very rarely go to the theatre, unfortunately. But, you know, and when I do, like, I see a lot of dance, but dance is transformative. Like, it's shifting all the time. In body politic, you know, my image is kind of looped, but there's also this thing about I'm running this loop, but I'm also getting crushed by this loop. So I do some actions in this loop that really, really put pressure on my body. One of them you would have seen in the workshop, those of you who were there, where I jump for 4 minutes. There's this one where I hold a speaker above my head for as long as I can, and eventually I get crushed by it. And so it's like technology is kind of swallowing me in this work, really. And this is me eating a hot dog, which is disgusting. So yeah, I kind of just slowly kind of get swallowed by the media. And lastly, I guess I just want to say, you know, there can be this kind of real false dichotomy about human is good and technology is bad. The human is organic and it's fleshy and it's alive, and technology is just cold and metal and it's dead. And I just don't buy that dichotomy at all. So I want to kind of almost conclude with this kind of beautiful quote from Tommy Orange, who's a Native American writer, and he kind of unpicks this dichotomy by basically saying the materiality that exists inside technology has actually come from the earth anyway. So it's all like, you know, the spirituality, and I think you talked a bit about spirituality and aura, like it. There can be, and I think Björk said that as well. Like there's spirit in the technology. So in summation, with, you know, thinking in a rigorous way about how and... Sorry, I'll just leave that up. You know, thinking in a rigorous way about how and why we include technological elements in our performance will have a great impact on the quality of these works. We will also get better at reading how technology can work alongside these other elements, and hopefully that means things will feel more integrated. And finally, is it possible that through the interrogation of media and technology and performance that we can also extend that investigation into our daily lives and therefore have a more integrated sense of how digital devices and media intersects with us as humans. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those 3 presentations. We're going to have some Q&A now. I just want to take an opportunity to respond a little bit to these 3 presentations before we open this up for questions. And, before you, this has been such a wonderful session. It's so rich, so many things that you have mentioned. I remember there was a quote with which the keynote ended, from Professor Ruccino about the multiple threads, and I'm not going to try to bring all those threads together, but I'm going to try to address one of the things that I saw throughout your work, and I want to throw that at you and see, if you agree with my interpretation of these things that I picked up. So, before I do that, though, there was something that Martyn, you mentioned, like this metaphor of the midwife. And I think it's such a strange and inadequate metaphor in many ways that, you mentioned it as, sometimes somebody else, but I was still thinking about that. And so there were 2 things I was thinking about that. One, that there's besides all the complexities of the gendered issues of the metaphor and all the many things that people might want to unpack, but one way in which I think this is very different is yesterday people were talking about how the dramaturg is also somebody who unsettles, and this is of course something like a thread that has been common throughout these many events. As there's also this Indonesian word of the pengganggu, like this, somebody who disturbs, who creates a disturbance, and I think that's exactly not what you want a midwife to do. Like, it's actually, the midwife is there to reassure you of a complex process and to assure you that it's going to be okay. So actually, I wanted to suggest, is the dramaturg actually the anti-midwife? Is somebody who's saying, well, actually, this is actually maybe not going to be okay, or maybe this is, this is not, is somebody who's there to seed doubt. And the other thing, the way in which the midwife is the dramaturg, I think, is in the sense that it's a human technology, that it's actually, I'm overextending this a bit too much, but there's this over-medicalized, business of medicine, which I could, in my mind see a little bit of this like over-technologized theater, and the midwife is a human who's, has subjectivity and can fail, but who brings all these different things. So to kind of connect the dots a little bit to the other talks, there were things that were mentioned or addressed throughout, which were the body. I think that came very strongly, but also absence. And I wanted to offer that as a point and see if you would agree with that reading. That, Wenchi, you also mentioned how, you wanted to build this perfect machine, and the difficulty in doing that actually helped you rethink your connection to the technology, and you offered this wonderful term of like the body of the technology, that everything has a body, everything is like human, and that sometimes also these, less is more, or moving down the things that you need to remove, the things that actually are better there through absence. That point was illustrated in very strong ways, I think, by JOMPET's intervention, that I think you also made us look differently at something we thought we expected, and that, to what extent I'm mixing metaphors, and I will, with apologies, but there's a thing about the train as well that you mentioned, and I don't think that you could possibly show anything that would make us have that reaction to the train. Like no matter what anybody would show on a stage or on a screen, we are never going to have that reaction. So maybe the only way that we can have that reaction is through absence. The only thing that would make us rethink is absence. Or how do we change how we handle the devices, as Martyn said, like, how do we offer the phone, how do we do things. So as should be clear at this point, I'm going in many different directions, but to bring it back to a slightly more concrete thread, I got the impression that you all were talking about the body and absence. And if I would want to extract a lesson, perhaps, or a piece of advice from here, is that the role of the dramaturg with relation to technology is really about removing things, about absence, and about getting people to rethink what they think they know about how they see things. So is this an overly simplistic reading of what you were saying? I mean, do you agree with this interpretation of what you said? So I just want to leave it there and then invite you all to respond.
I guess just because I know Wenchi's work a bit, and it's interesting at the end of Loop Me and also at the end of Wave, you've set up the body is driving this work, but then the body actually leaves in both of those works and the technology continues. So this looped visual version of her just keeps going for maybe 10, 15 minutes. And in Wave, the kind of sculptural lighting system just continues. And there's this really interesting question of like, how is that connected to your body? Your body is absent now, but it's continuing to go. And somehow you're still here. Even though you're absent, you're still here with us as well through this technology. And I love that. I love that when technology can take on a kind of... It's the same in your work, actually, as well. Like, can take on a kind of almost human kind of form or something.
I think in the because I also have a lot of thoughts on this absence or what is disappear in working with technology, and then I think as a dancer or physical worker, I try to protect the holiness of my physical presence, but in a way, like while working with technology, like I try to believe or I try to incorporate the presence of the medium I work with as well. And so, for example, in Lumi, I think the idea is that it was for me to observe when the image of the body was taken by the video and suddenly then project into another surface. And then through the video manipulation, you can change the timing, you can disfigurate it, and you can recompose it. And for me, it was a slightly like shock to see that, to see your own body being treated or being shifted in that way. And so I question at that time, while your movement is transformed into information itself, it becomes 0-1 then. And then through that 0-1, you can actually transform this information into another format. It can be a sound, it can be an image, it can be, any graphic. So for that piece, second, like you mentioned, second piece, I wasn't there. I wasn't there. So it created a lot of critiques of like question on the if we go to the theater and the dancer is not there and it's the only video left, is it still a theater piece? So there's a big discussion on that. And I also think that absence, although my idea is to create a perfect machine, because I think the desire for technology, in a way I question, because it always talk about the time in the future, what we can do in the future. But through study the digital architecture, I realized the form or the architecture, the space it designed is actually going into a very organic way. So it was imagined that I kind of reference back to the time when we live in the cave. So while I work with technology, actually I always refer to the past. I constantly want to refer to the past, where the condition of human being, where we want to be and what we want to, how we want to communicate with the nature or, you know, like with our body. So there's a, let's say, we also look at what we call aesthetical mistake from the machine, because we thought machine can repeat perfectly, but then when you working, if you work, at the time I work a lot with copy machine, because copy machine, it should be 100%, 100% that give a perfect copy. So I try to copy a lot and try to see how this machine will make mistake. And so by observing the image, it prints out like hundreds of prints. So it turns out after thousands of prints, the quality goes down a little bit. So I realized machine does make mistake, you know, like that didn't, you know, cope up to our expectation. And then on building that perfect machine, because it's like the idea when we try to build a robot, we want this human being, same like me, and try to have the same emotions and same reaction like human being. But at the time, my team, we were questioned because actually the event was mentioned, the Fukushima power plant, and it was a huge event for us because we start to question about the arrogance of technology and how much we believe in the perfection of how technology can offer us, but turned out there's a mistake. And the mistake might not come, of course, we build machines, so machine, actually, then you see the mistake also from human being as well, you know, like to cope with our expectation, but then compared to what we can actually do.
I think I started making artwork just right after the dictator fell in Indonesia in 1998, and I think I just one of Indonesians who exploded to express their euphoria, to do what was not allowed before, to read what was hidden before, and we from time to time we found that a lot of thing was hidden or shapeless after the fall of after the Reformasi, during the Reformasi. So I think, yeah, and now I'm looking back. I think I'm one of Indonesian who wants to get in the shape of what was shapeless before through the technology. So I think I work a lot with images of ghosts. I created a ghost or yeah, like I think the Noda, the installation of Noda, the leaking room is quite representative to express this to, yeah, that is creating how to say, I don't know what to say, to bring this the trauma. I mean, the trauma is quite abstract and shapeless, and it's like being in a leaking room. We want it to be white, but it is never white.
We can open this up to questions. I guess there are plenty of things that people might want to share on these topics and also ask our participants. So do we have any questions? I want to ask another very quick question. You know, inspired by what you said just now, also about the politics of media, and that's something that you were not, like, none of you mentioned that explicitly, but I'm just curious to what extent are the politics, I mean, you have a work, of course, called, Body Politics, Martin, but I wonder to what extent, when you are doing things in your work, is that actually a concept that you use, or is it also too wide to be meaningful?
Your work feels very political.
Okay.
To me.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer this. Oh my God. Can I think first?
Sure, yeah, and I don't know if anybody else wants to jump on that.
On the concept.
Yeah, I mean, is that a useful concept? I mean, one thing that you also mentioned in your presentation is that, you found that both dramaturgy and technology are not that useful. So I wonder, is, in the context of technology, is the political a useful concept, or is it also too broad and too abstract or complex to be of use?
When I talked about, I didn't really apply the two words dramaturgy and technology, because I think at the time we think that technology is too technical. Because technology doesn't mean hardware, doesn't mean machine. So we thought that this term is a bit too narrow for what we want to do at that time. So we thought of, there's a lot of terms, for example, new media art or tech art or multidisciplinary art or interdisciplinary art or transdisciplinary art. For example, interdisciplinary art, I didn't really understand at the time because I think it's when back in Taiwan, I feel like it's for granted theater is a very multiple disciplinary. So I didn't think in this part that I'm coming to combine different discipline. So I just think of what is my question and what I want to proceed. This is my beginning point. And then so we see technology as a tool. So it doesn't mean, and then it depends on what's the concept for our project that year. And so we try to decide either we want to use video or we need to build some kinetic installation. And dramaturgy for me is because we work as a collective. In a way, it's a collective, but then I'm the one who decide the starting question. And then along the way, because I think because in the beginning, although I study many subjects, but I know that I will not going into, for example, I'm not going into Isadora and study for this software for a year. So at that time, I discussed with my team, saying is there any way we can work together? And then because technology is moving really fast, and each of us in the team, we have a different medium. So one is in sound, one is in video, and one can do the mechanical design. And so we decide to share the job. And along the way, I try to put the team together because each person are very strong individual in a way. So we don't have this hierarchy of dancer or choreographer or this kind of thing. So it's really try to be as equal as possible, and then to see what can start from there. And along the way, dramaturgy is to direct, not direct though, is to observe what the material comes out from the artist, and then try to put it in order, I think. This is my...
And just briefly, I think there is some politics of new media in that only certain people can afford to use it. And then also, as Zurhan actually said in the workshop on Friday, it's like in body politic, it's like, well, the person that's in front of the camera and who I am has a particular meaning as well. If it was someone else of a different culture, then that would have a different meaning as well. Just, you know, so I think there is inherent politic in technology. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got plenty of questions. So, do we have a microphone? Yeah, can we get a microphone to the speakers?
Thank you. Sorry, we are not to pick up on too much of what you said in the summary, but just as a mother who's had 3 children, I did not want an anti-midwife, but as a director, I'd love a dramaturg. So I think the midwife probably does have a place, but I know you're being slightly provocative in that. But no, don't give any pregnant mother an anti-midwife, but do give a dramaturg to a director, I would suggest. But it was just interesting as well in picking up in your relationship to the mention of the first moving image being a train, and I love the fact that, you know, the story of that everyone ran from the theatre, and it got me thinking interestingly as to, I mean, I think there are many reasons why obviously moving images don't make people flee from the theatre now, and that's probably a lot to do with an understanding of theatre etiquette as well as the understanding of a moving image. But it made me think about, actually, as an audience member, my biggest joy is when I feel like I've been hit by a moving train. And if I have sat in an audience and have felt that, then I know I have a response to the piece that I've just seen, which in turn made, I was thinking, when does that last happen? Because sadly, it doesn't happen all the time when I go to the theatre. But certainly, a piece that was in CIFA last year, being 1984, which was co-produced by the State Theatre of South Australia and Headlong. And I was also reminded of another production where I really did feel like I was hit by a train, which was The Maids, done by the Sydney Theatre Company, with Kate Blanchett and Isabelle Hubert. Both those pieces as well, it was interesting in relation to what you're talking about, that there were fantastic uses of technology in producing those pieces of work, and how the creative team had incorporated them, made it so fantastically seamless that it was so meant to be there, which was just so fabulous as an audience member, but obviously also as a theatre practitioner to see. And Martyn, it was your comment where you said the biggest question, and relating to dramaturgy is, and to this concept is, and into that awful feeling of, shit, have I just been to Universal Studios or have I been to see a great piece of art? In that conflict is, why are we doing this? You said in the theatre, but in relation to your work as a piece of theatre, would maybe make it even that broader, in the fact that in a theatre makes us often think of a stage and rather than the likes of work that you talked about as well. But I just, in light of all those sort of thinking and what you've all brought to this panel, is in terms of, as we move the work we do as directors forward and as dramaturgs, involvement in it, the ways of educating and creating a greater understanding of how we can incorporate technology into our work without it feeling like an add-on, so that we do come out with those feelings of being hit by a train each time when we've had the joy of using it. How can we make that happen more and more to make it a really constructive piece?
I think it's interesting because the three of us are makers who also are interested in technology, and so both of the ideas of the performance and the technology come together at the very start. I think when you get into trouble is when there's a theatre show and you've written the script back here. I talked about this in the workshop, so sorry for everyone. The script's written back here, and then the production starts here, and this is also when the video comes in. And so it's like there's all this time where the script's being worked on and reworked and edited, and there's a dramaturg involved and all this stuff, and then the video comes in here. And so the video actually needs to come here. It needs to come at the same time. And then they're built together, because you started with the ideas of the technology at the same time that you started with the ideas of the choreography, you know, and you're building your machines with an idea of where they're going to go. And same with me, like I'm a video artist as well, so I'm constantly thinking in tandem about those things. So it's actually about changing them, in terms of a theatre company or a major theatre company, it's about changing the modes of production and shifting the time, because media production takes time. And theatre directors don't understand that. You know, you'll go out of the room as a video artist, you'll make something, you'll bring it back into the room, and they'll go, "Oh, we've cut that scene," and you've just wasted 3 hours. So the people, that understanding needs to be better. Yeah.
There was Sihan had a question.
This is still being formed up here, so I'll try to pose it as eloquently as possible. But just to clarify something that Martyn brought up regarding my comment during the workshop, is how technology inherently has a gendered perspective or a classist perspective or a racialized perspective. The example I use is cameras, where it's designed intentionally to film to capture certain skin tones under certain types of conditions. So that is also the angle that I like to bring into the conversation, somewhat linked to the question on politics. What really struck me about watching JOMPET's video is this sublime awe and terror in confronting an assembly. And it's somewhat linked to what Cui was bringing in the morning when we talk about a very romanticized notion of theatre as a form of assembly versus the very visceral and potentially violent assembly that has been utilized and instrumentalized in a way through technology and as a means to assemble and to gather and to change their perspective and to enact violence under illiberal regimes around this region, and technology as a device of power and control. Especially within the trend of theatre, or I'm thinking about light tech, and I'm also thinking about WENCHI, is using technology as an ambiguous veil to dissipate responsibility beyond a single figure. So it's no body, it's an absence of a body, and it's also not a single body. And what happens when technology is dramaturgically used for that effect and means? And what does it mean for us to be producing theatre under these social conditions?
I'm sorry, can I add on something to what he just said so you also have more time to think? It's a tough question to really process. So I was thinking, like, I can see a lot of this in the work that you have shown, all three of you, but in the sense of the way in which it was presented, there seems to be some kind of dichotomy set between the human and technology, which you have broken in a lot of ways in the kind of work that you have done. But I would like to think about power, the question of power, and not in the Foucauldian sense where we know that for a long time now the state has used technology, especially medico-legal control of the citizen's body for regulatory purposes, right, and for governance. But in terms of the other end, where it is not the state, it is the artist who's using technology, and in that sense, I would think that photography is a technology of the production of the human, right? So what are the ways in which technology is used to produce the self creatively? And where do you really think that technology ends and the human begins? Because I'm very influenced by this particular essay written by Paul Preciado. It's called Testo Junkie. It's on the trans male experience of taking testosterone. And this person has written at length in a biopolitical frame that they have borrowed from Foucault, but also taking it much beyond that. So don't you think that photography, theater, cinema is also a technology of producing the human in a creative sense?
Okay, I think I will, from where to start? Okay, I think maybe like, as I see the technology as an extension of the man, for example, when I work with the kinetic installation or sound or light, I didn't think them as something apart or something alien. So I try to incorporate it in a way that we are one body. Like, and there this, I think you mentioned about this, the medium is the message. And because the medium is something that you use to, as a body, as a material itself. You can say like, this is the materially body, and then there's something that you want to say. And for me, I try not to have this binary separation, but indeed this helped me to start to think like man-machine or your aura or these materials, your body as a material. And technology for me is, there's this kind of feeling of the video itself is not simply something else. It's from your physical presence. When you share this presence, it becomes part of your presence. I think that this kind of, as in this book, the medium is the message, trying to say that while you repeatedly read the same news every day, the content of the news becomes actually not important. The importance is the repetition of the broadcast, the way how they broadcast, and it's repeating like a wave sending to you. And what the content is might not be that important because it's about this repetition itself. So I try not to think of that because I think as a human being reacting to technology, there's much more than that. And not to say that we don't want, I think this part of our, how we evolve our time, and you somehow, instead of thinking to avoid it, something apart, I will try to incorporate as if yeah, something.
I don't really have anything amazing to add, but just jumping off from there, yeah, I think I'm trying to, yeah, the technology and the body in the work that I make is completely, I try to co-opt it. I try to integrate it completely, so it is. I work with the same system quite often, and so it becomes part of my body. It's cyborgian in a way, and yeah, I mean, all of the things you're saying about power, they all exist, and who creates this technology, and why do they do it, and what's it for, and all of those things. But I'm hoping that inside what I'm doing, it is actually interrogating those things at the same time. So it's not just I'm playing into a kind of power structure or I'm playing into a kind of capitalist structure, but that hopefully I'm actually interrogating what that thing is, and that thing is my body. So, yeah.
I don't know if I am answering the question, but I really learn or inspired or interested in the, well, like the people who with a motorcycle with a bum bum. During the dictatorship, this idea to have this motorcycles without mufflers and doing this is a way to because you are muted, you are muted to you are not allowed to speak up any critical thinking to the government. Then it is replaced by these sounds, and then they become exist. I mean, these people become visible, become heard, but in a different way, in a not in a way people want to see them actually. Not the way he want to be actually. It's I don't know if this great answers.
We've got 5 more minutes, so perhaps a couple of questions. You know, maybe one complicated questions or 2 easy ones. So yes.
Hi, Michael Early from LaSalle College of the Arts. I was just wondering if any of you saw Still in the festival and just what your reaction was. I mean, it seems to me it was, absolutely stunning production, extraordinary use of technology, by which the human is subservient to the technology. The human is just kind of a prop. And it's billed as, I think, a kind of theater piece installation. So I was just wondering how you saw that, because in all of your talks I kept thinking about that, because I could see relations, complicated and simple relations to that particular production.
I saw that piece in Taipei, and downtype is some group I really like a lot, like early downtype works. And then I think because in the beginning, a few pieces, they really try to, it's the urgency of the existence crisis. So, and then facing the age of technology. So there's, I see the speed, and then afterwards when in Still, I feel it's aesthetically established, like in terms of visual aspect of technology, and it's as clean and sharp in the way I appreciate its quality, but as the content itself, as body as a prompt, I don't know, I wouldn't, in a way I try to have a more, me myself, watching shows with technology, I would rather to think it more layers, like, because there's one thing I also work with is this close relationship of technology and human being. And it's based on this, the mythology of Narcissus, and seeing that you see your projection as if you see your projection in the virtual space, and then you fall in love with it. And while these projections are extended away from your body, in a way you are still the one, but that this kind of extended part is already something else. As I guess it's a bit like mother and child relationship. So it's a different entity as well, although it's come from your own self. And when it is something else, I guess there's this also a layer of the human being, or I would see like the dance shouldn't be the only center of the show. This is what I insist also when I'm doing the piece, is that because most of the time I think I have a discussion with new media artists. They say like, most of the time when we work with a choreographer, we feel like technician. So it's to serve the choreographer, and the dance as a center of expression, of narration. And it shouldn't, for me, it shouldn't be, because if you talk about this, each medium and we all compose as a whole body, then for me there's a time for dance itself, there's a time for the props, there's time for the music, and then there's time for another kinetic installation. So each one for me, there's a purpose. And I think when I see still is try to visualize how director want to compose his visual flow. And then I feel visual flow, visually, even it look as a still image, that I try to compose the still image into movement. And that's also in my practice. So it's not about dance, it's not dance is a series of photography, like photos. And through series of photos, you have a flow of what you want to say. So I watch the performance in this perspective.
So we've got time for a 1-minute reaction, or
let's move on. Oh.
Martin, perhaps. We've got one last question. Yes.
No, it's actually not a question, just a reaction. So thank you so much, because I also work a lot with technology, or I think about it a lot also because I'm a Gen Z, I guess. And when I think about not just technology, but maybe new technologies or current technologies, and when I think about it when I work, it's all about affordances, like what are these new technologies affording us to do, not just in the work, but in the world as humanity. What is it allowing us to do? And then what is the meaning behind that affordance? I think if there's like a summary of how I relate to new technologies, it's about affordances and the meaning behind it. So yeah, just wanted to.
Thank you. And I think that's a very good point in which to end this conversation. There are many lingering thoughts and lingering questions that I hope, to paraphrase, there's a time for dance, there's a time for lunch, and there's a time for questions. So hopefully those things will continue to inform each other. And if you can just join me in thanking all the artists for this panel. And thank you again to ADN for inviting us and for organizing this. As you know, this is the first time that there's a technology and dramaturgy panel as part of this event, but hopefully not the last. And thank you all very much.